The town of Havenwood was old. Ancient oaks, gnarled and twisted, lined the streets, their branches casting long skeletal shadows. The houses, mostly Victorian, stood like watchful sentinels, their paint peeling, their windows like vacant eyes. A perpetual mist clung to the town, thick and heavy, muffling sound and shrouding everything in a ghostly silence. Havenwood whispered. It whispered of secrets buried deep, of shadows that moved in the night, of things best left undisturbed. Sarah lived in Havenwood, or rather, Havenwood held her captive. She was a fragile thing, all pale skin and large haunted eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the town itself. Sarah was an outcast, shunned by the other children, whispered about by the adults. She was different, they said, touched by something dark and unsettling. Sarah's parents were gone. A car accident, the whispers said, their hushed tones laced with a hint of something darker, something unspoken. Sarah lived with her aunt now, a stern, bitter woman who seemed to resent the girl's very existence. She treated Sarah with a cold indifference that chilled the girl to her core, leaving her feeling lost and utterly alone. Sarah yearned for connection, for someone to chase away the shadows that clung to her. But the other children shied away from her, their eyes wide with a fear they couldn't quite name. And so, Sarah retreated further into herself, into the darkness that seemed to beckon her, to whisper promises of solace and belonging. One night, driven to desperation by her loneliness, Sarah did something unthinkable. She had heard the whispers, the tales of a dark power that lurked in the shadows, a being of immense power who granted wishes to those brave enough, or desperate enough, to call upon him. That night Sarah knelt on the cold floor of her room, her heart pounding in her chest. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I'm so alone. I just want someone to see me, to hear me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. A cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing the candle and plunging Sarah into darkness. And then she heard it. A voice, deep and resonant, seeming to emanate from the very walls themselves. "You called, child?" it rasped. Sarah's eyes widened in terror, her breath catching in her throat. She was frozen, paralyzed by a fear so profound it stole her voice. The voice chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "Do not be afraid, child," it said, its tone deceptively soothing. "I can give you what you desire. I can make you seen, make you heard." Sarah found her voice, her words a mere whisper. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her voice trembling. The voice chuckled again, the sound sending shivers down Sarah's spine. "A trifle, child, a mere trifle." From that night on, things began to change. Sarah started to hear whispers, voices that seemed to slither from the shadows, murmuring her name, promising her power, urging her to embrace the darkness. The children who had once shunned Sarah now flocked to her, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. They hung on her every word, their laughter echoing through the once silent streets of Havenwood. Sarah reveled in the attention, in the power she seemed to wield over them. She was no longer invisible, no longer alone, but the darkness had a way of twisting things, of perverting even the purest of desires. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, urging Sarah to use her newfound power to punish those who had wronged her, to make them suffer as she had suffered. And Sarah, intoxicated by the darkness that now pulsed within her, found herself powerless to resist. A young priest, Father Michael, arrived in Havenwood, his eyes filled with a warmth and compassion that Sarah had never encountered before. He saw past the darkness that clung to her, past the fear that radiated from her, and recognized the lost, frightened girl trapped within. Father Michael reached out to Sarah, offering her kindness and understanding, trying to draw her back from the abyss she was teetering on. He spoke to her of light, of hope, of a love that could conquer even the deepest darkness. For a while Sarah felt a flicker of hope, a yearning for the light that Father Michael represented, but the whispers were always there, insidious and persuasive, reminding her of the power that coursed through her veins, the power to make her enemies pay. One night, as Sarah stood at the crossroads between light and darkness, the whispers reached a fever pitch. They promised her unimaginable power, the ability to shape the world according to her will. All she had to do was fully embrace the darkness, to seal her pact with the entity that whispered in the shadows. And Sarah, her heart torn between the hope that Father Michael offered and the intoxicating allure of power, made her choice. She embraced the darkness. The transformation was swift and terrifying. Sarah felt a surge of power coursing through her veins, raw and untamed. Her eyes, once filled with sadness, now burned with an eerie, otherworldly light. Havenwood trembled, the very air thick with the stench of sulfur and dread. Sarah was no longer the frightened girl who had prayed for someone to see her. She was something else entirely. Something monstrous. With her newfound power, Sarah exacted her revenge. Those who had wronged her, who had whispered behind her back, who had treated her with cruelty, suffered. Accidents befell them. Strange illnesses plagued them, their lives unraveling in a terrifying crescendo of misfortune. Fear gripped Havenwood, the whispers now laced with terror. Father Michael, his heart breaking for the girl he had tried to save, watched in horror as Sarah spiraled further into the abyss. He knew he had to stop her, to break the hold that the darkness had over her. But how do you fight a force that feeds on despair, that thrives on pain? The climax came on a stormy night, the wind howling like a banshee, the rain lashing down with relentless fury. Father Michael confronted Sarah in the old abandoned church, the air thick with the stench of decay and the weight of unspoken sins. Lightning flashed, illuminating Sarah's face, twisted in a mask of hatred and despair. "Sarah, you don't have to do this," Father Michael pleaded, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "There's still good in you, I know it." Sarah laughed, a chilling sound devoid of all humanity. "Good," she spat. "Good is weakness. Good is what got me ignored, abandoned, forgotten. Power is all that matters, and now I have it." As Sarah raised her hand, ready to unleash her power, Father Michael closed his eyes and whispered a silent prayer. He knew he couldn't fight Sarah's power with force, only with love. He opened his eyes and looked at Sarah, his gaze filled with a compassion so profound it seemed to pierce the darkness that shrouded her. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft yet firm, "you're not doing this because you want power. You're doing it because you want the pain to stop." "Your pain." Sarah froze, her hand trembling in midair. Father Michael's words were like a pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness that had enveloped her. He continued, his voice barely a whisper. "The entity you made a pact with, it feeds on your pain, it amplifies it, twists it, turns it outwards, but it's still your pain, Sarah, and only you can stop it." The storm raged around them, but inside the church, a different kind of storm was brewing. A battle for Sarah's soul. As Sarah stared at Father Michael, his words echoing in her ears, a single tear rolled down her cheek. And then, with a gut-wrenching scream, Sarah collapsed to her knees, the darkness that had possessed her receding like a tide. The storm outside subsided, the only sound the soft patter of rain and the gentle sobs of a broken girl. Havenwood would never forget Sarah. Her name, once whispered in fear, would now be spoken in hushed tones of sorrow and regret. The darkness that had gripped the town lifted, but the memory of Sarah's torment, of the chilling power she had wielded, lingered like a ghost in the shadows. And in the whispers of the wind, some swore they could still hear her name, a chilling reminder of the girl who prayed to the devil and the terrible price she paid.